Hey team. All right. So your homework tonight is pages 29 through 39. And if the stuff with the characters is getting a little confusing, I'm going to post a chart for you in the resources folder so that you can kind of keep everybody straight. Okay. So here's what we're doing today. We're going to be working with connotative language again. But instead of looking in our book, we're actually going to be looking in poetry because connotative language can really be anywhere. So we're going to look at a couple of poems. All right, so we're going to have two short poems that we're going to read. And we're going to read through each and we're going to kind of talk about what it's about. And then for each one, you're going to find what you think are the five best examples of connotative language. So remember, connotative language is a word that brings up a really strong reaction, right? So, for example, the word wild makes us think of like something untamed. It might make you think of a wild animal or like being out in the wild in the forest. Not a lot of people. It's not sophisticated, right? So that might be some of the associations that you have with the word wild, which is one of the things I'm going to ask you um, to describe. Then I'm going to ask you to put down if you think the connotation is negative or positive in the poem. Okay, so not in general, but in the poem. And then I'm going to know why you think the author chose that word. So, was she trying to get across something specific? Was she really trying to get you to imagine something, right? So, just take your best guess. All right, so you're going to go into your iLearn and you're looking for 2.5 connotative language in Dickinson. And so I'm going to read both the poems and kind of summarize what they are about. And then you'll see in your worksheet here, you have poem one and then the second poem, and in each, there's a place for you to summarize what it's about. And then there are the places for you to do the connotative language. So the first poem, We Grow Accustomed to the Dark, and the second poem, Before I Got My Eye Put Out. Okay? So we'll go through all that together. I'll make sure it's super, super clear to you. So the first thing we're going to do is just read through the poems and summarize them, try to figure out what they're about. Okay? One thing before we start that it will be good to know is that we are reading poems by Emily Dickinson. She was a poet in the early 1800s. She wrote a ton of stuff. She was really prolific. And she was also pretty reclusive. So, reclusive means you're kind of just like in your house. You don't really talk to people. Very, very, very private, very introverted. And she struggled with depression and mental illness. And so that's a lot of what she writes about. Okay. So let's just keep that in mind as we read these two poems and try to figure out what they're about. All right, poem number one, We Grow Accustomed to the Dark. We grow accustomed to the dark when the light is put away, as when the neighbor holds the lamp to witness her goodbye. A moment we uncertain step for the newness of the night, and then fit our vision to the dark and meet the road erect. And so of larger darknesses, those evenings of the brain when not a moon discloses a sign or a star, come out within. The bravest grope a little, and sometimes hit a tree directly in the forehead. But as they learn to see, either the darkness alters, or something in the sight adjusts itself to midnight, and life steps almost straight. Okay, I'm going to ask you to try figuring out what you think this is about before I reveal it to you. Okay, so pause the video. All right, welcome back. So, what we're talking about is what do we think this poem is about? And this poem, when she says dark, she means her depression. Okay. And so, what she's writing about is that, like, we when depression happens, right, it feels dark, it feels closed in, it feels, sad or like nothing's ever going to be good again. And so she's writing about how we have to journey through that and we have to find our way through it. And that eventually what happens is that we learn, she says here, either the darkness alters or something in the sight adjusts itself to midnight. So she's talking about that we learn to deal with it, right? We learn to manage it, or we learn how to move past it, and life steps almost straight. So things kind of go back to being good. So I'm going to put here, she's writing about the darkness of her depression and about how she needs to manage it in order life feel good again. Okay. So if you have something else, that's okay. But this is really what she's writing about with this one. All right, so let's move on to our second one, which is called Before I Got My Eye Put Out. Before I got my eye put out, I liked as well to see as other creatures that have eyes and know no other way. But were it told to me today that I might have the sky for mine, I tell you that my heart would split for the size of me. The meadows mine, the mountains mine, all forests, stintless stars, as much of noon as I could take between my finite eyes. The motions of dipping birds, the morning's amber road, for mine to look at when I liked. The news would strike me dead, so safer guess with just my soul upon the window pane, where other creatures put their eyes, incautious of the sun. Okay, take a minute and see if you have any ideas what this poem is about. Okay, so Dickinson is talking here again about her depression and about her reclusivity, her wanting to be private. So when she says before I got my eye put out, what she means is before I became depressed. So she's saying that she liked to be in the world, right? She liked to see. Um, but if someone told her that she could kind of go back to that life, to not being depressed, that she could go outside and see the sky, she could see the meadows, the mountains, the forests. She says, the news would strike me dead. So she kind of feels like she wouldn't be able to handle it or she's afraid of it. So it's safer to just kind of look out from where she is with her reclusivity, right? It's safer to kind of watch what's happening from afar than to participate in it. Okay, so let's try to put that all down. So she's saying, she's saying that before she was depressed, she liked to go out and be with people. But now that she is depressed, she feels like it's safer to stay home because the world is too much to handle. If you feel like you had no idea what either of these two poems were about before we started, that's really okay. Emily Dickinson is a little bit hard. Her poetry can be a little bit difficult sometimes. So that's really, really okay. If you feel like, what? I didn't think it was about that. What are you talking about? Okay. So now I'm going to leave you to do the rest part on your own because you've worked quite a bit with connotative language. So you're going to go back to the first poem, We Grow Accustomed to the Dark, at the top here, and you're going to look for what you think are the 5 best examples of connotative language. Then you'll go through and do just what we talked about. You'll put the associations that you have with the word, so what it makes you think of. You'll put whether it's positive or negative, and you'll put why you think she used that word. Right? If you have questions, make sure that you let us know.